to?
Well, deferred maintenance is a fancy bureaucratic word for the stuff we built doesn't work anymore.
Oof, I got to take a breath there. That's you look at, you start to size that up, and it's a huge,
It's big,
almost insurmountable.
and they don't have the operational money. We've all heard the story that they've got a brand new pump, but they can't afford diesel to run it, right?
We could make the case that if just because you maybe don't hunt public lands, but maybe you're near, a big flagship national wildlife refuge or a big WMA that's got a rest area and it's got good hunting and stuff like that, that you should be equally as invested, if not more, into, the management of this place than, the guys who hunt it 60 days out of the season.
Welcome to Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Brice. Today we're tackling a major question affecting public land duck hunters. Why is the habitat and infrastructure on so many of America's best public hunting areas falling apart? This is especially true in the southern United States, where busted levees, failing pumps, and other deferred maintenance are literally drying out quality hunting areas, and the ducks have taken notice. What can Delta waterfowl and duck hunters do about it? Joining me now are two of Delta's policy experts, John Devney and Cyrus Baird, to explain how this happened, what it means for the future of public land waterfowling, and what duck hunters can do to help right the ship. With that introduction, let's get started. John Devney, Cyrus Baird, welcome to the Delta Waterfowl podcast.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be on.
Yeah, welcome back, John. Cyrus, first time?
Yeah. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I bet you, if I'm going to put some money down, and I don't like to bet, but if I put some money down, I would say that your name, Cyrus, is traveling a bit like wildfire. So I would imagine people are getting to know you out in the public space.
Yeah, I would sure hope so.
Lots going on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I think I know the rest of that sentence, but when you say I hope so, why would you hope? Because you're doing a lot of good work out there?
Yeah, I would hope that certainly at least our members and volunteers and folks in the duck hunting community maybe attribute my name to Delta and the work that we do, or see my name out there, or see our name out there rather, and think ducks and duck hunting when they see it. So certainly a hope, right?
I would think so. Yeah, that means you're getting good stuff done.
Yeah.
Well, people know John Devney. Just a quick little introduction, guys. John, you've been on a couple times at least, three, maybe four. You might be getting the most frequent guest award.
Oh, that'd be great.
That'd be just like, make your day.
I'd be really excited about that.
Give you a T-shirt. But so, John, you're the Chief Policy Officer. You've been here since 1998.
Yep.
A lot of change.
Lots of change. We didn't have a studio in 1998.
No. A lot of change for Delta, but a lot of change for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just throwing this at you, just kind of out of the blue here, John, but just kind of in biggest chunks. How would you kind of talk about Delta's evolution?
Yeah, I mean, from 1998 to today, it's almost indescribable, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, tiny little membership, 1998. Very few people knew who we were in 1998. Predator management and hen houses were an emerging idea at the time. 98, we didn't really understand the decline of duck hunting that you talk so much about, Joel. To today, where I think, obviously under your leadership, we're moving predator management and hen houses to have a big impact on ducks through the Million Duck Campaign. I think those early lessons in the early 2000s, when we changed our mission statement to include duck hunting, translated in a lot of work that Cyrus and his team are doing to make things better for ducks and duck hunters. The way the organization's grown and the impact it's had, I don't think I could have imagined in 1998. Maybe hoped, but probably didn't imagine.
No, I was thinking one of my early memories in 2001. I think it was in 2001. Was it still a stapled not the magazine, but it wasn't like a stapled, almost like a pamphlet. It was a little bit before that.
The first covered magazine was fall of '99.
Okay.
It was 24 pages, which was a pretty big deal because it was an 8-page fold-over newsletter before that. But the magazine, the website. I don't know that social media. I'm glad Delta's doing good work on social media. I don't know that we imagined it was a thing in 1999, but yeah, huge amounts of change, and I'm delighted to see Delta's sort of oversized impact relative to ducks and duck hunting that's occurred over that time, and in the opportunities that we're going to see in the next strategic plan and in the years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably it was all VHS tapes maybe back in the day. But anyway, we don't need to go that far. But Cyrus, again, welcome. Senior Director of Government Affairs.
Yeah.
When did you start here at Delta?
4 years ago. It'll be 4 years next month, in July.
4 years, just like that.
Yeah.
I think you guys knew each other prior to then, and you and I did as well.
Yeah.
But why don't you give the listener just a little bit of your background? And just kind of tell us where you're from, and maybe a couple of the the stepping stone jobs. We'll call it a stepping stone because working for Delta is that's where we want you to stay. So, and just kind of bring us to today.
Yeah, the spots along the way. Well, I always joke with everyone and tell people I'm a failed biologist. I did my undergrad at Clemson in wildlife and fisheries biology, and I think had every intention of going out into the field and doing nest surveys and banding ducks and putting a drip torch to the ground and things like that. And very quickly found that I like working with people on a day-to-day basis, maybe more than, being hot and sweaty and banding ducks and all that stuff. Not that work's not important, certainly, but this is just kind of the role I've found. I've always had a weird nagging, we'll say, passion for politics and the legislative process and nerdy stuff like that, and so kind of found a way to marry those two. But yeah, I've graduated from Clemson and kind of jumped into the real world, and I've worked for a handful of really good conservation organizations, including a number of our partners, all in kind of the policy, advocacy, communication space along the way, working on recruitment, retention, reactivation things with the Council of Advanced Hunting and Shooting Sports, working with our partners at Ducks Unlimited on a ballot initiative campaign in North Dakota, of all places where you guys are. Everything from red snapper management in the Gulf with TRCP to, farm bill stuff to African big game, policy with Safari Club International. So, but yeah, I've known John for, I don't know, John, probably 10 years.
Yep, probably.
Maybe more than that. And, when there was an opportunity to come work for John and come work for Delta, I'm certainly a duck hunter at heart, and this is definitely more of my fit in the work that I like to do and the things that I like to talk about. So, it's been 4 years, but it certainly hasn't felt like that. It seems both a lot longer and also like a kind of a snap, in time. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I think you kind of have the double whammy of careers. One, in the policy world, no 2 days are the same, right? Change is a constant. There's always pressures. But the other part, which I always say, I was always drawn to waterfowl management, simply because of the continental, intercontinental in some cases. Like you talk about a world that is changing. There'll never be a perfect state.
Right.
And if you ever got it, you'd have to fight like heck to keep it.
Yeah.
So welcome to like I said, a double whammy of policy or politics and waterfowl.
Yeah.
But good, very good. John, rather than, I kind of want to establish your guys' credentials in the work that you're doing here. Do you have a favorite, I'm putting you on the spot, do you have a favorite policy win where you think it gives just a great example of what can be done? Righam Wright is an industry leader in high-quality waterfowl hunting gear and proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. From blind bags, backpacks, and gun cases to dog vests, dog stands, and dog blinds, Righam Wright has you and your hunting dog covered for long days in the duck marsh. And even more exciting, Righam Wright has launched its new mainline series decoys that are lightweight, durable, and they look awesome. Check out Righam Wright's complete lineup at www.righamwright.com or wherever you buy your hunting gear.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd pick one. I'm pretty proud of the work we did to get the working wetlands and the post-harvest flooding stuff in the 2018 Farm Bill. That's still potential that's not yet fully realized. That's pretty big and pretty airy, and it's a long way from where most of our members live. I think the work that Cyrus and his team do to defend and support access where real people live and where rural people hunt, and that has a ton of different manifestations. That's Brian McRae in Canada working with Jim Fisher to defend, against discharge ordinances. It's, Cyrus can number off legions of examples. But at the end of the day, I'm here because I'm a duck hunter. You're here because you're a duck hunter. Cyrus is here because we're a duck hunter. The only reason we occupy this building is because there's duck hunters that care enough to support what we do. So those new incremental or preserved opportunities for duck hunters sort of day in, day out, I think is the stuff I'm most proud of. That may not be the most intellectual answer. And, maybe by the end of my career, that'll change. But, where I sit today and look at the architecture of the landscape that's facing ducks and duck hunters, working really hard to preserve that access and opportunity becomes harder and harder all the time. So I'm really proud of the work Cyrus and his team and Jim Fisher and Brian are doing in Canada to make sure that access is and opportunities out there for duck hunters.
Yeah, I think, John, for the most of our career, the duck production side of Delta has been really popular. A lot of the early membership surveys, why do you like Delta? Predator management was probably the number one. But then I've seen through time there was a period there where hunter recruitment became maybe a bit of the darling, but I would say that for the past number of years, yes, those are still popular and really critically important areas, but it's been fun to see the emergence of the policy work at Delta. And I think it's a combination of two things. One, you've built quite a team. How many? Wait, 5?
Oh, don't ask
Six.
me to count.
Six. Six policy experts, so there's one, so that's a great reason to like the work that we're doing. But the other one is I think it's an indication of the number and frequency of problems that are emerging on the landscape, and that's the scary part. You don't really want to be popular because there are so many problems. But really I think it's kind of a collision of those two things.
And we're aware of the problems, right? I think by bringing Cyrus on, by hiring Brian McRae to help Jim, to adding Chris Hoon and Jeff Wardlaw, now you have people that have eyes and ears out there on the landscape in a way that we didn't. Cyrus is tracking thousands of pieces of legislation every year that has some connectivity to ducks and duck hunters, and that visibility and paying attention then creates in and of itself more opportunities to be either working on the offensive to create new ideas and capacity to do good productive things looking ahead, or respond to those threats as they emerge. So it's a real credit to Cyrus and the guys, because we just have more opportunity to have more impact because they're good at what they do and they're working closely with our members and volunteers in all those places across North America.
Cyrus, 4 years, do you have a favorite win or favorite effort you've been a part of yet?
Oh man, I have ones that are definitely my favorite for, like one-off personal reasons and stuff like that. But when I think of kind of a complete, win in terms of, Delta's role in it and impact and stuff like that, I would certainly point to the work that we're continuing to do in the Atlantic Flyway to repeal all the Sunday hunting prohibitions. Kind of jokingly, but not, I've got you guys pulled up, and I've got the Pennsylvania House of Representatives floor pulled up right now, waiting for them to pass that and send it to the governor's desk, with something we've been working on, something Delta's been working on since at least 2019, but something I've been working on for 4 years here. We were able to repeal the prohibition in Delaware last year. I think we're right on the doorstep in Maryland. We got the last of the prohibitions in Virginia done in 2022. Brian and Jim are doing great work on the other side of the border on the same issue, and PEI and a number of other smaller jurisdictions, kind of local municipalities and stuff like that. So, um, it's one of the biggest, I think, things that we hear from not only our members and volunteers, but just rank and file duck hunters or sportsmen and women in general in places where they still have these things. Is it's an opportunity to add that much more access and opportunity on a day where most people have off from work and things like that. So it's become a really important subject that we work on, a really important issue. So, and then every state that still has it, they're all, it's all different, and they've got different reasons for still having it on the books and stuff like that. And, John joked with me last week that if we repeal all these prohibitions and we're done, kind of jokingly, what am I going to do next? And I was like, well, I'm sure something else will pop up, but right now I've got all these things on the big board and I'm ready to scratch them off. I'm going to scratch Pennsylvania off like while we're on this podcast.
I have to point out, or just give you some clarification. Policy wins aren't like kids. You can actually have a favorite. So just if we ask you that in the future, you can you could pick a favorite in the future. Don't feel bad about that. All right. That was really good background information, guys, just to learn a little bit more about you and some of the issues and the successes that we've had. But to get into the meat of today's podcast, I do want to go back, 4, 5, 6 episodes ago, where we really started talking about this concept called duck distribution. And that podcast, or the whole duck distribution concept, was Delta's response to a lot of reports that we've been hearing over the years about poor duck seasons, particularly in the South. We heard it a lot from the public land duck hunter for many, many years in a row. But what stood out to all of us last duck season or two was the fact that a lot of private land duck hunters, who've typically been insulated from some of the issues that we're going to discuss today, they too were experiencing poor duck seasons. So we came up with, and that whole podcast, I would encourage you to go back, but the 5 pillars are duck production, weather variability, changes in agriculture, public land issues, which is what we want to talk about today, and then hunter expectations and regulations. That hunter expectation one, I think, can go into just about any one of those other pillars, but it is a standalone topic as well. But today we'll talk about public land issues. And so just kind of maybe to give some background on this, John, we are talking about public land in this case. Yep. Talk about what's going on with public land.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to do my best to summarize. That was a big, thoughtful conversation we had a few ways back there. But I think when you start piecing it together and start looking at the issues that duck hunters are facing across big swaths of the country, certainly an issue in places like Arkansas, Louisiana, but I think it goes pretty, I think in Cyrus's part of the world, some of these issues are really acute in the mid-Atlantic. I think you can make the argument in places like California and other places too, is as we look at how the landscape has changed for wintering ducks, especially wintering ducks. We spent a lot of time talking about the changes in the prairies and infrastructure and that sort of stuff up here on public lands isn't as acute a problem, just because of how we hunt ducks up here versus how lots of people hunt ducks elsewhere. But we've seen, as we talked about, this pretty significant change in sort of what I'd call background habitat, whether we're talking about the loss of coastal marsh in Louisiana, loss of how changing agricultural practices in places like the Mississippi Alluvial Valley have changed potential duck distribution. And I think there's this sort of a conversation that we've been having as a policy team, and then as we've been having at Delta, is those changes against the backdrop of declining asset value, I'll call it, on our public lands, has sort of brought us to this awakening where in the landscape today that ducks and duck hunters face, we need those public trust assets to work better than maybe they ever had to historically. And I remember talking about it on that original podcast, Joel, is that if you went back 20, maybe not 20, but 30, 40, 50 years ago, those state WMAs, those national wildlife refuges, were probably the crown jewel of management for ducks and geese. And today, we've had this huge seismic shift where those assets are in trouble.
Mhm.
They're not providing the kind of habitat they used to. And at the same time, private assets, private duck clubs, have become managed exponentially better. And so I think it's one of these things we're real interested in having a conversation about, both in terms of having a conversation with duck hunters, but having a conversation with policymakers, so that we can start to claw back to that place we were probably 30 or 40, 50 years ago, where we want those public trust assets, whether we're talking about state-owned wildlife management areas or we're talking about national wildlife refuges that are providing really good habitat for birds, but consequently either directly improving hunting opportunity on those properties or on the surrounding properties, or at more of a local or regional scale.
So again, it's the government-owned land.
Yep.
I guess, should we restrict the conversation to government-owned land, John?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
State or federal.
State or
Yeah,
federal.
state and federal.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and then again, you did make a reference that in the north, okay, we're in North Dakota, the public land, it's such a different.
We shoot
different.
pheasants and deer on public land up here. Not that much duck hunting is taking place on public land here.
Yeah, and I guess the difference is in that in the north, there's a lack of infrastructure.
Right.
Really, there aren't, on these big prairie wetlands that happen to be on a waterfowl production area or a state wildlife management area.
They're not pumping.
They're not pumping it. There's
Yeah.
not a boat ramp in 99.9% of those cases.
They're not doing moist soil management. Yeah, they're not doing those things. It's a big natural marsh, and it's either there or it's not.
And if we're talking about management on a northern public land, we're typically talking about the uplands,
Right.
from a breeding waterfowl standpoint,
Right.
not from a hunting standpoint.
Right, exactly.
Unless you're talking about
Yeah.
pheasants, deer, or some other
Yep.
type of game. So we are talking more in that part of the world where we're talking about infrastructure management. Where does that start? If we move south out of the Dakotas, when do we start getting into, or east? I know Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, Iowa. I mean, I'd make some arguments in places like Minnesota, that are more habitat that's more oriented towards migrating ducks rather than breeding ducks. Cyrus, you probably have examples in the Mid-Atlantic where, there's plenty of examples there, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to draw an imaginary line, I would say maybe the border of New York and Pennsylvania, where I would imagine there's a lot more, we'll call it intensive management done on state WMAs in places like Pennsylvania than maybe their neighbors to the north, and certainly further down here in Virginia and the Carolinas, it's all there is, basically, for some of their flagship wildlife management areas, and certainly on national wildlife refuges as well.
So it is, the management of public lands for hunting. We're typically talking
for wintering or staging.
or for wintering.
waterfowl.
It's kind of a middle of the continent, south and east, actually.
It's mid to south. Yeah.
Coastal.
Yeah.
Yeah, coastal.
Yep.
So we're literally kind of talking about just kind of a small, like Prairie Canada, Prairie U.S., and this is
else.
a bit of a widespread issue
Yep.
everywhere else.
Yep.
So if I'm a public land duck hunter, and I had an area that I'm accustomed to hunting for many, many years and having success, the ducks are obviously attracted there. I'm able to access it, boat ramp or on foot or whatever it may be. And if we're talking about this concept called, I keep hearing a lot, John, called deferred maintenance.
Yeah.
That tends to be kind of at the heart of a lot of these issues. What does that refer to?
Well, deferred maintenance is a fancy bureaucratic word for the stuff we built doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
Right? So imagine pumps, levees, water control structures. In the waterfowl world, I mean, the ability to move and manage water is pretty central. And so, that's gotten called, in Fish and Wildlife Service parlance, that's deferred maintenance.
Okay.
I'd make the argument it's a huge problem, huge problem. But I think if you layer on to the deferred maintenance problem, we can talk about the specifics of that. We've had reduced staffing capacity, especially on national wildlife refuges, a lot of state WMAs too, and they don't have the operational money. We've all heard the story that they've got a brand new pump, but they can't afford diesel to run it, right? So you've got sort of your capital investment with your infrastructure, whether dikes, water control structures, pumps, etc., the people to do the work, and then the resources to keep that work going. I think if you want to put them in three buckets.
Whew, I got to take a breath there. That's you look at, you start to size that up, and it's a huge,
It's big,
almost insurmountable. It has the feeling for being insurmountable.
Yeah, I'll let Cyrus chip in here too, but I don't think it is necessarily. I think it's about recalibrating our priorities within the community. I mean, when I started showing up at professional meetings and spouting off the condition of the refuge system, Cyrus, you were when we were in Big Sky at the AWCP meeting, and people thought I was a wizard because we were bringing up these issues, and it was news to almost everybody. And I think it's one of those things when you've had a really successful model like the National Wildlife Refuge System, or the way we all envision wildlife management areas, state-owned properties. It's been so good for so long that I think it probably fades to the corners of our vision in terms of a priority. And one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time with, and we're going to continue to spend a lot of time with, is bringing those issues front and center. Because, again, I think it has huge consequences for how ducks are going to use the landscape. And I think it has huge consequences for where folks are going to be able to shoot ducks on that landscape, especially in staging and wintering areas.
I'm trying not to jump around too much, but Cyrus, when you're talking about these government-owned public lands, state, federal, are the two buckets we're choosing to stick with today. Are these different conversations, or is there a common thread? And then I guess second to that, there's one federal government, but there's multiple states. Yeah. So does the state of public lands depend on the state as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there are definitely, not to be, have a sellout answer, but I think there are certainly commonalities between both state and federal across the country, but then there are a lot of differences. At the federal level, John does a really good job over the last couple months highlighting to our members and volunteers and partners, the differences in the enacted versus, the president's budget on things like the National Wildlife Refuge System, and the discrepancies there, and how, we've basically been trending downward on the enacted budget for the refuge system since fiscal year 10. We've lost 29% of the workforce for the refuge system since fiscal year 10, and things like that. And then if you're in a state, states are, not exactly flush with cash, right? State Fish and Wildlife agencies. There's certainly a handful out there that have some type of dedicated conservation funding mechanism, a sales tax, or things like that. But by and large, they have been doing a lot over the years and have been asked to do more, basically with less. Help other user groups and be everything to everybody. And so I think they're, John talks about maybe reprioritizing things like infrastructure on public lands and stuff like that. I think, in my opinion, this is a personal opinion, that's a lot of what it is a lack of priority and lack of prioritization for these lands when it comes to managing them intensively for migrating and wintering waterfowl. If you've got an agency culture, and I'm certainly not throwing any state under the bus or anything like that, but if you've got an agency culture that just doesn't kind of see the value in having pumps that work, having, a refuge manager on site and doing things like that for people to go out and recreate and hunt, that the budget's going to reflect that, and it's kind of a compounding thing at that point. So I think there are definitely some commonalities. I think we've We've seen just generally decrease in budget in terms of, interest in towards funding these types of things. We've seen a decrease in staffing, both at maybe the state and federal levels. Um, but then certainly, especially when you get in the state world, every state's kind of different. They've got their own, unique what's going on and own set of problems.
I kind of want to look at this. I love analogies, and I think, let's say we all had cash to go buy a house. We just plop it down, right? And let's pretend that a state agency does the same thing, or a federal agency does the same thing. They just go and they buy land, and let's say that land has water control structures, and it has boat ramps, and it has dikes and levees and other trail systems, and they have a budget and equipment to plant food, right, in a rest area, all that. Our house has a furnace, it has windows, it has doors, it had all those things that we had money to originally purchase that house.
Right.
But then over time,
put on a 30-year loan.
well,
And low interest rates. Right?
no, in this case,
Yeah.
we bought the dang thing, right? We just bought it. Boom. Had some big windfall of money. We just bought it. So obviously your furnace needs some amount of maintenance. We have money to take care of that. But then the furnace fails.
Right.
And so you get to that moment. So I always have that question. So state or federal agency they decide they're not going to replace the furnace. They're not going to replace, or that they don't have it. Why don't they? Is it a pot of money that existed to buy doesn't exist to replace? Or, again, is it just a lack of priority? Is it a loss of user fees? Is it diverted budgets? What is it? Because if they all have this in common, is once pristine prime operating infrastructure, now it's crippled or degraded, and it's not being taken care of. What's the common?
You look like you had something on your lips there,
Well,
Cyrus.
and
I'll let you go first.
I was gonna add one more kind of reason is a lot of states, not by their own fault, just get caught up in the larger system, right? So we were working on an issue in Louisiana a couple years ago, and if a WMA manager wanted to buy a pump to replace at a WMA somewhere, they've got to go through capital outlay. They've got to go, it's a state bidding process that takes, X amount of months and this and that. And there's just so many layers of government that touch a lot of these things that one thing can go wrong and kind of derail an entire project. And you get years and years of things like this happening, and it just kind of degrades the system. So that on top of everything else you just said, right? Like that's just one more layer I was just thinking of things that maybe can go wrong throughout the process. And that, certainly big government can be a hindrance to trying to work quickly and fix things and, in this space.
So the money's there. It just got caught up in procedure sometimes.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say is a true loss, not a diversion. Are we talking about a true loss of dollars or a diversion or both?
I think
probably.
we're talking about both. I think it depends on where you are and what the issue is. I mean, let's take the state of Arkansas. State of Arkansas is one of the wealthier, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission is one of the wealthier agencies. They do a really good job of assessing their green tree reservoirs and find out they need to manage them a lot differently to manage that health of that, those oak trees over the long time horizon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you do that work and you start to engineer those solutions, all of a sudden you figure out you got a $60 million engineering and construction problem on your hands. So it wasn't that Arkansas Game and Fish Commission was not spending the money wisely. It's that, we built a bunch of those, impoundments and green tree reservoirs when we didn't know as much about trees as we do today. And so it's going to take essentially redoing infrastructure if we want that resource to be viable in the long term. And which means you're going to take out a bunch of infrastructure that you had to make water deliveries more efficient, get water on quicker, get it off quicker, to keep those trees healthy. And so we've learned a lot in the last 20, 25 years to know the old system isn't going to work particularly well. And so it's going to cost us this big chunk of dough to retool all these things the way they are. Plus, you look at, we're talking about a lot about moving water around. There isn't a place, I can't imagine there's too many places today where water isn't more complicated than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, right? We do a lot in lots of places around the country to move water around quickly, and that sometimes can be a benefit to managing things like wetlands for wintering ducks and duck hunters. In some cases it's not, right? And so how you have to design, engineer, and that probably in some places expedited the failure of some of these water control structures and levees because just we've changed hydrology in so many places. So I think there's, I'll be bold enough to say it. The refuge system occupies a smaller percentage of the Fish and Wildlife Service budget today than it did in 2010. That's a fact.
Okay.
That's not a value judgment. That's a fact. So over time, Fish and Wildlife Service leadership and Congress and the administrations have deprioritized that and prioritized other things in its place. And that's a conversation we want to have with this administration is do what the agency's been great at for a long time. Let's be good at counting ducks and banding ducks and doing migratory bird programs to allow for annual hunting seasons, but manage refuges because this is one of the crown jewel assets of the United States, the North American model, and we should be investing here. And maybe that means other things need to be deprioritized. I can give you some examples. I'm not going to do it right now. I'm not going to do it on a public forum. But, that's a fact, is that the Fish and Wildlife Service refuge system, as a percentage of the Fish and Wildlife Service budget, has decreased over time.
And that makes sense. So to me, this whole public land infrastructure, the cause and effect, I'm a bucket guy. This one sounds like it has a ton of buckets. There's a deprioritization budget.
Mm-hmm.
There's a loss of budget bucket. There is it costs more than it used to bucket, so the money goes into one area and it doesn't spread out as far.
Doesn't go as far.
And there's the other part. If your budget stays the same, it's actually going down.
Right.
Because it costs more to do the work.
Right.
So I guess you guys carry these buckets into every conversation. And you might do when there's an issue reported, you probably have to figure out which bucket you're dealing with. And they're not all the same. And there might be multiple reasons for each one of these particular properties. Before we get into some examples, like I think probably if you're listening to this, you are picturing some type of degraded or decrepit type infrastructure or property, or you think of the place that you used to love to hunt. But before we go there, Cyrus, I think when we're talking about public land, we tend to talk about the hunter who doesn't have their own private land that they like to hunt. They don't have their lease, they don't have their club. And I'm primarily, well, I guess other than knocking on doors, I'm a public land hunter myself. But I think when I think of private land in the South, I think, wow, this high quality property where ducks are attracted to. And then I think that property will keep ducks local and that maybe those ducks will trade out into the public land.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see the private land, I can see a benefit of the private land to the public land. Does the converse, is that a thing? Is that high quality public land with a rest area that's drawing in ducks, can it be an asset to the neighboring private lands as well?
Yeah. A great example of that is a place that we've been working on, pretty hands-on for the last 4 years in Southwest Louisiana with White Lake Wetland Conservation Area, which is essentially a WMA for them. At one point, it's something like 75% of all migratory waterfowl in Southwest Louisiana was occupying White Lake at some point during the winter. And so as a result, all the neighboring private clubs had, phenomenal hunting places like Pecan Island and what's the name of the other big club there? But, beside the point that when White Lake is operating as it should, and it's holding birds, the hunting is good there, but it's also good, you drop a pin on it and make a circle. I don't know how many miles, but it's good everywhere around there. And when it's bad, the hunting's bad all around there as well. So, the we could make the case that if just because you maybe don't hunt public lands, but maybe you're near, a big flagship national wildlife refuge or a big WMA that's got a rest area and it's got good hunting and stuff like that, that you should be equally as invested, if maybe if not more, into, the management of this place than, the guys who hunt it 60 days out of the season.
And I think if you look at the way duck clubs get scattered, if we were to review advertisements about, I've got a private duck club for sale, one of the
Yeah.
attributes will be I'm next to XYZ refuge or I'm next to
Yeah.
XYZ. That isn't by happenstance, because historically those were the properties that had in close proximity to these areas that were very core to staging and wintering ducks. And so, everybody that could had the resources to buy properties and clubs around those places did. It was the absolute core of the ducks in that part of the world. And so what's happened is we've just moved the really good management duck carrying capacity out.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I think when we start talking about this issue at scale, if we can get WMAs and refuges managed better, it will mean better hunting within the boundaries of those properties.
Yeah.
We think it's going to have a huge carryover effect at the local to regional scale when you start piecing these things together, refuge by refuge, WMA by WMA. You're going to create good hunting for everybody. And start augmenting everybody's hunting opportunity.
That makes a lot of sense. The last podcast with Brad Cohen, he was talking about funding that they had for this research project where they established rest areas up and down a river where there weren't rest areas.
Right.
And what they found is that ducks would be drawn into each one of those rest areas, and it would create kind of a local to regional network for ducks to trade in between those areas, benefiting everybody in between. And so that I can understand you painting that picture. It comes easily to mind. So I'm a duck hunter. I pull up to a public hunting area, public land. Is the degradation or the lack of management, does it just hit you in the face, Cyrus? Or is it sometimes very subtle and sometimes very obvious?
Yeah, I think in some places it's really obvious, right? You see on Facebook or, kind of the internet refuge forum type places where guys talk about impoundments that haven't had water on them in years, and, they have pumps, they've got all the things, but maybe they're broken and, doesn't pool or whatever. So some places, and in some cases it's super obvious. Other places it's probably a little bit more nuanced, and, maybe to the average Joe duck hunter, they wouldn't maybe see it at first glance. But it's maybe not living up to its full potential. And so, maybe they're still shooting a couple of ducks every time they go out or something like that. But, this place at its prime used to hold tens of thousands of birds or something like that. So the places that are obvious, I will say they'll smack you in the face, right? Like you can see it from a mile away, but there are certainly things that are kind of in between where, maybe to a waterfowl manager of a, state agency or just in general, like they're going to notice a lot more than, the general person off the street,
Yeah, I suppose it can be as simple as subtle as a washboarded 2-track going into the parking lot or a cratered boat ramp, and all the way as obvious as
missing
this area is
concrete,
dry.
Right.
Like it normally had water and it is just dry as a bone.
Well, and I mean, you think about it. Let's go to, something that I think all of us would like to see more of is moist soil management. But moist soil management requires your ability to move water on and off really in a very narrow time window, in very intentional way. But if your infrastructure doesn't allow that, you're not going to manage high quality moist soil. You may see a little swamp timothy and you may see a little wild millet, but you're not going to see the pound for pound yield that you'd be getting if you're managing super intentionally.
Yeah.
So there's an infrastructure problem. The other thing is, if you really want really good moist soil, you got to be keeping it in early succession, which means you're going to be out there disking and keeping the cattails and willows and crap at bay. That takes people. But it also takes somebody to put diesel in the tractor, and it takes somebody to spray, and that's more OEM. So going back to those three buckets of infrastructure, deferred maintenance, people, and money, all can have an impact on, that 600-acre moist soil unit that 25 years ago was absolutely chock full of ducks because it was managed really intentionally. To today, it's managed fairly passively. It grows up a little stuff. They close the boards because they can't afford to flood it. So when you get the rains, it ponds water. And there's some duck food in there, and there's still a few blinds, and you can go out there and shoot a couple ducks, but it's going to be a long way from the heyday that it was 30 years ago because of the lack of management.
So, Cyrus, I would imagine, there are people whose job is to take care of these properties, staff it up, pump it, whatever the activity is. Kind of in one broad brush, I guess I'll ask a question. These must be some frustrated people.
Yeah, well, at least on the federal side, talking about the National Wildlife Refuges, again, we talked about a reduction in workforce of something like 30% in the last 15 years. I'm sure they're frustrated, but they're largely not there anymore, right? Like we've seen National Wildlife Refuges go from having 6, 8, 10 people on the ground at a particular refuge to, I spoke to a gentleman at a refuge in Missouri a couple of years ago where 10 years ago there were 10 people, and now it's him. He's it. And he's retiring in a couple of years. And so, there's just been a large reduction in workforce, and instead of backfilling those positions, like maybe the service should have, again, John talked about the kind of the plight of the budget since, fiscal year 10. But instead of backfilling those positions, they've basically been complexing all of these refuges together. And so now where you used to have 4 or 5 refuges, maybe in a state, and they each had, 10 or 15 people, a couple biologists, a tech, this or that. Now there's 4 or 5 refuges in a state, and there's maybe 3 people working for all of those refuges.
Right.
So they're just getting spread super thin. And so, yeah, I would imagine those people are super frustrated. But, by and large, a lot of the people that maybe should be frustrated or were frustrated simply aren't there anymore, at least at the federal level.
Yeah,
I think there are probably similar situations at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, you take Catahoula National Wildlife Refuge in Louisiana. I mean, it's a Ramsar wetland. It's one of the most important staging areas for canvasbacks in the Mississippi Flyway. Incredibly historic waterfowl hunting area. It's complex. I mean, here's a really important refuge. And now they're spread. I think it's in the central Louisiana complex.
Yeah.
With a handful of other refuges. So, I mean, when you can't staff a refuge like Catahoula, I think it should be indicative of what we're seeing. And I think the state folks are in the same. Yeah, and we did a webinar here with our volunteers here back in February, I think, Cyrus, wasn't it?
February, March.
Because I think the natural inclination is to be mad at the one person who's still at the refuge.
The one that cares,
right? Because that's the only person that answers the phone or answers the door or is there when you get there. And part of the impetus for doing that webinar was for those folks, our members, our duck hunters, our volunteers, to understand that person is a symbol of a failing system, not that person's the problem, because in very few instances, believe me, when you talk to the dedicated men and women that manage refuge, manage WMAs, the overwhelming majority is they're a victim of circumstance. It's not that they're intentionally screwing up habitat for ducks and duck hunters. It's they're doing the best they can with what they have, which is very damn little.
So the next time you go to your public hunting area, give your public land manager a hug.
Yeah,
right?
it'd be better than screaming at them.
You're going to get more accomplished that way, that's for sure. So I guess a couple things here is that I would imagine as public infrastructure degrades, a particular property is not as attractive to wintering waterfowl. Let's just pick a southern area. Not as attractive to wintering waterfowl. But some areas are. So I can see how you are probably maybe increasing the competition amongst hunters. Let's say none of the hunters drop out and they quit buying licenses. They all find a way to keep going. And if they're relying on that public land, I could see some crowding, more competition. What happens to the ducks? You know, do they where do they go? Do they move to other parts?
Here's what I know. I mean, and duck hunters have demonstrated their ability to travel a lot to shoot ducks. But I think ducks can move way faster than duck hunters do, right? And I mean, Cyrus, you live in the mid-Atlantic. 70% of your duck hunting takes place within an hour of your house.
Yeah. Yep.
I live here in Bismarck. 85% of my hunting takes place within an hour of my house. And I think, they did that big NAMWOMP duck hunter survey. And I think that was one of the really interesting statistics, is how important having quality opportunities within a reasonable distance of home has on how you feel about duck hunting, right? And so, if the duck shows up at a WMA or a refuge somewhere and the habitat's crappy, the duck flies away.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a bunch of people that's within the core of their hour, right? And so, I mean, I'm worried about how the ducks respond to this, but I'm not worried about how the ducks respond to it because they're not going to survive, or they're not going to get enough to eat, or they're not going to come back up here to make baby ducks. I'm interested in this question because of what it means to duck hunting, right?
Yep.
In maintaining that historic duck distribution where folks where they live can have access to hunting without, having to fly to Alberta or to this great place or to that great place, because at the end of the day, we'll price a huge chunk of the waterfowl population right out of duck hunting if it's jumping on airplanes and hiring guides, right? And so what can we do in a place, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, those kinds of places where we can maintain, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, where we can make sure that those public trust assets are in an improving condition, so they're attracting ducks and are providing those high quality opportunities for duck hunters. Because I'm not worried that ducks are going to starve. And ducks, I think God gave ducks wings so they can go exploit habitat wherever they can find it. But I think duck hunters are more bound to places in zip codes than
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great. I was going to save this until later, but I think it's probably a lot of doom and gloom here. So I think it's important to maybe provide a little bit of perspective on what it can be, what can happen when you have a win. Do you guys have any experience, John, in your time, Cyrus, in the last 4 years, or dipping into your time pre-Delta, but an area that was unattractive to ducks was fixed, air quotes, fixed? How quick of a payoff in ducks can we experience? Lucky Duck is a proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. While being an industry leader in waterfowl motion decoys is their focus, they have the hunter in mind when designing all of their products. From their 5-star crash-rated Lucky Duck kennel to their full line of predator hunting gear, they are committed to serving the hunter 365 days a year. Check out their wonderful line of products at www.luckyduck.com or at a local retailer near you.
I'm going to be hard-pressed to find a great example. Back Bay our Back Bay chapter did some stuff at Princess Anne Wildlife
Yeah.
Management Area at Back Bay of Virginia, which was almost immediate. But if we flip it and say, okay, let's look at properties where the private sector has managed it really well.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's lots of those examples where folks have gone in, bought habitat, really laid the wood to developing it and managing it, and the duck response is really quick.
Okay.
And so I think, I don't know that I'd have a really great list of examples, but what I can tell you is that we've seen it enough where the private sector has made those kinds of investments and enhancements in management, and the payoff is almost exponential.
Okay.
Or almost immediate.
Yeah, we get just collect this over time. We get questions like, "Hey, can ducks forget to come to my part of the world?" If there was a loss of infrastructure, of attractiveness, would ducks just forget to come here? Would they no longer migrate? And I've always said, I don't think ducks think at that level. Like their ability to identify and exploit resources is uncanny. It's creepy at times.
Well, it's what they're good at. That's what they're built to do, right?
Yeah. So hang in there. So
Yeah.
I think what I'd like to kind of come out the bottom end of the funnel, Delta's role in this whole conversation, but the other part too is what can hunters do? So John, what makes Delta uniquely positioned to function successfully in this realm?
I think a couple of things. I think one, we've been at the very forefront of identifying this problem, right? And I go back to 2020 when we all got sent home from COVID. The president and Congress really interestingly were spending a lot of time talking about infrastructure. Now, they were talking about airports and bridges and interstate systems, but that was really part of the political narrative in Washington, D.C. right prior to COVID. And so we got sent home for COVID, and I worked with my colleague Ed Penny, who's a policy director for Ducks Unlimited in the Southern Regional Office, and we all know Ed, and you worked with Ed when he worked at the state of Mississippi, and we said, well, we're gonna document the failing infrastructure on national wildlife refuges and wildlife management areas, just because we thought that this broader political narrative was conducive to hearing the messaging. And Ed went out through his channels, I went out through ours, and we came back and we compiled a list of over $250 million worth of deferred maintenance needs on waterfowl and wetland projects on priority waterfowl refuges. Okay, so the broader national wildlife refuge infrastructure deferred maintenance bite right now, I think, is at like $2.6 billion. But that was just the real core ducks and duck hunter stuff.
That's a subset.
It's a fairly narrow slice, actually. And at the same time, we did the same exercise for the state. So again, priority waterfowl and wetland infrastructure, pumps, levees, water control structures, on priority state-owned properties that had sort of high value to ducks. That was over $600 million. So almost, not quite 3 times, but 2.5 times as big as the refuge. So, I mean, first, undertaking that was a big lift, right? And a colleague asked me last week, he said, number one, is that up to date? And I said, no. He said, well, would you do it again? I said, no.
No.
Right? We're gonna use the information we got. But who else would have sort of catalyzed that conversation, right? Yeah. And in that conversation resulted in the refuge system receiving about $90 million a year for the last 4 years through the Great American Outdoors Act. And we're now on the verge of that being reauthorized, and the current target investment in the Senate bill is $100 million a year over 8 years. Now, unfortunately, we haven't seen that go to the projects. We haven't seen the magnitude of investment in the projects we care most about. But Cyrus can talk about how we've leveraged that in conversations with state legislatures and state agencies as well. But so I think it's us having a connection to our members, to our volunteers that have had this experience, and then trying to find answers to it. And now the answer to all the world's problems isn't money, but the answer to a lot of the world's problems is money. And when it comes to things like deferred maintenance and finding resources for capacity in OEM, the answer is money. So I'll let Cyrus give a few examples in the state space, but I think that's a really good example of how Delta's sort of early leadership catalyzed an initial investment, and we think it's going to be sustained over long term.
I had one thing that maybe I wanted you to speak about real quick, Cyrus, is that,
Sure.
What I heard you say, John, is, we had the passion, the dedication, we have the experience. One of the things that I've said on other podcasts is Delta has no interest in surviving a loss of duck hunting.
Right.
Duck hunting goes away, Delta goes away.
Right.
So that's a little short way of saying it. But the chapter system, Cyrus, I know you spent quite a bit of time, is that I'd say, so, my answer to why is Delta positioned to work on these issues, I would say all the things you said, just not as good. But then I would say our chapter system and the ability for two-way communication for a chapter who lives in that community, who knows it better than we do, they can elevate an issue,
right,
whether it's a hunting closure or infrastructure, to you guys and your team. But the other thing is that you can push information to them and then them out into their friends and buddies and local community to act. Tell me the value of our chapter system to your work, Cyrus.
Yeah, good call, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about anyways. The funny part, at least on the state side, is I would say most of state legislators have kind of no understanding of these issues, right? Even if they've got a failing wildlife management area in their district. And so, we've been very effective at using our members, developing a really good relationship with our members and volunteers, and having them be, the spokespeople for these issues in their backyards and with with their legislators, right? I always tell our folks, if I'm happy to fly into X state and have a conversation with whatever legislator, whatever lawmaker you want me to, but it's way more impactful to have you guys as their constituents sit in that same office and have that conversation. And the good thing is we've got very, very passionate members and volunteers. A lot of them are public land duck hunters, and I think they see real value in being part of the solution to all of these problems. And so it's not hard to motivate them, these men and women, to go in and talk to state fish and wildlife agencies or talk to lawmakers about these problems. And so they've really been able to amplify our voice, where I'm one person, John's one person, Chris and Jeff, Brian and Jim. But when we use our chapter network and our volunteers, we're able to amplify our message across the country, to an audience that doesn't hear a lot about these issues to begin with. So, they keen in on this, and we become easily the subject matter expert group of, all things public land duck hunting and water control structures and infrastructure and you name it. So we've relied very heavily on them in certain cases across the country, for sure.
And I mean, and I think, Joel, exploring White Lake, the story of White Lake with Cyrus is a really good one. It's a contemporary one. Cyrus and Jeff just had a pretty monumental win. But, I mean, we wouldn't. Cyrus is in Virginia. I'm in North Dakota.
Yeah.
I mean, if it wasn't for Brandon Broussard, God rest his soul, who was our state chairman in Louisiana and one of the world's greatest volunteers, and understanding that some things had happened there, hurricanes and man-made
Yeah.
bad decisions and a laundry list of stuff, we would have never been conscious or aware of the
Yeah.
need for it and its importance, again, both to those hunters that hunt that WMA, but the surrounding community. So it was Brandon's passion for this issue that made me very interested in it, and then made Cyrus very interested in it. Now, Brandon's not with us anymore, but Jeff Wardlaw went into the legislative session with that the same intensity that Brandon had. And so we're going to see a pretty consequential investment because of that catalyzed energy that came out of Brandon's leadership.
That's some pretty powerful stuff. I do think switching a little bit, but staying, I think, in this lane is what can people do? Like, what can the listener of this podcast do to make a difference? And I would point out on our website, we have, although we have a new website, but I still think it's there. There's a news section where we can report on the things that have been done,
right?
And can learn. And I think a listener could draw from a success story. Maybe something that happened. Maybe it'll happen in their community. They could report it. I do think on our website we have all of our staff listed with email addresses. So if there is an issue that emerges in your area, jump on our website and reach out.
Yep.
Pick up the phone. Everybody at Delta is still, after all these years, John, is still, from the CEO to anybody in the office, you can reach out and talk to someone, and your call will be valued. You have an advocacy alert. I'm going to botch the name, but you have a way. Can you describe that and maybe where people can find it?
Yeah, so it's our Duck Hunters Action Alert System. And it's two things. One, on the back end, it allows myself and Jeff and John and Chris, our policy team, at least in the States, to monitor and track and analyze pieces of legislation. John talked about us being able to basically parse through thousands of bills since January 1 of this year that have something to do with duck hunting. That's that tool that helps us do that in real time, and we kind of funnel it down to, I think, what did we have, John, like 170 bills that were like the bills that we were working on this year. So it started with tens of thousands, down to this, down to this, down to this, down to these are the 170 most important bills to ducks and duck hunters in the States right now. That's on our end. On the front end, the public facing side, one, it allows you to see the issues that we're working on. So those bills that I just talked to you about, you can see exactly what the bill is. If we've got a position on it, we can put notes in there and stuff like that. You as the end user, as our advocate, can follow that through, the legislative process. So, you can see when a bill's coming up for hearing. You can see that it voted out, 100-5 or whatever. It allows you to see kind of our core issue areas, access and opportunity, conservation funding, sporting heritage, things that we work on. That's kind of our bread and butter. But then on the alert management side of it, if there's a piece of legislation or some type of regulation proposal, whatever, in your backyard, it allows us to interact with you directly via email and text. And, I always joke with people and say, everyone gets too many emails, but this email system actually means something. It's not a donation solicitation. It's not hey, will you, read this latest article, whatever. When you're getting an email from our action alert system, it's because there's something in your area that you can help be part of the process and part of the solution on. It connects you directly with your lawmakers through email, phone call, and social media. We can do long form emails. We can do quick, snappy social media posts directly to your lawmakers. It's pretty useful, and we certainly have seen it be used and be very effective throughout the years. And it's just a way for us to not only engage with our members and volunteers out in the world, but have them actually, like I talked about earlier, amplify that message and interact with their elected officials and help be the voice of Delta and the voice of duck hunters.
So when that phone rings, answer it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What I like about that, you were talking about you can, if there's an issue or we want people to reach out to their congressmen or women, and you can populate who they should be. It'll
Yep.
auto-populate who that message should go to. It'll
Yep.
auto-populate the message, because I think a lot of people are intimidated. I don't understand. I understand the root of the issue, the heart of the issue, but I don't really know how to put it into words. When they go into that, this is just a sidebar. Can they can customize that
Yep.
language too?
Yep. We usually leave a field in there where, we have some suggested text of, if we're working on a bill and we want to see this amendment added that does, X, Y, and Z, we'll put something in there, suggestive text of, dear Congressman so and so, we'd love for you to add this amendment to this bill. Here's why. But then we always leave a space in there because personal narratives and personal stories, again, coming from their constituents, always hold a lot more weight with members of Congress, with state senators, with, all the way down to dog catcher, than if they're just being spoon fed the same kind of 5 talking points. And so we always try to leave space and room in there for our members to have a personal narrative and personal story in there.
Okay, I do have, John, one of the things that I think an individual, a duck hunter in this case, can say, I'm just one person. My voice doesn't matter. You tend to think of it as a national election. You go, I'm just one vote. What difference can I make? But one of the things that I think you've impressed upon me, John, over time is that it doesn't take 10,000 emails to somebody or 10,000 phone calls. 5, 10,
Yeah.
15
It
can
doesn't.
make a difference, right?
Yeah, and especially when we're talking about relatively small niche issues, right? And Cyrus, on the backside of that webinar that we did with our volunteers on the state of the refuge system, within a week we triggered 30-some thousand emails to
Holy cow.
members of the House and Senate, just generally
Yeah.
about the state of the refuge
Yeah.
system, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, and as Cyrus pointed out, and again, so yeah, lots of these decisions are going to be made far, far away in Washington, D.C. through arcane legislative processes. We all learned more about reconciliation in the last 3 weeks than anybody cared to know. And there are a lot of people who now know what the bird bath is that didn't know what the bird bath was 3 weeks ago. Yeah, and that's true. But, there's going to be decisions made in Little Rock, Arkansas, or Columbia, Missouri, or in state, Jackson, Mississippi, or in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that are not far flung. And these are people, those elected officials, you're going to see them at your kid's ball game, and you're going to see them at church, and you're going to see them in the community. And so it doesn't have to be this sort of intergalactic challenge, right? These are people that, and again, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the refuge system. At least as it comes to deferred maintenance, those issues in the states are almost 3 times, or almost more than twice as big, more consequential in terms of gross dollars.
Guys, this has been a really fun discussion. I've learned a lot. I learn something every time I jump on one of these discussions with you about policy action. I used to, I'll be honest with you, I used to think that policy was boring, but but man, there's power in numbers, right? Like the team that you guys are a part of, somebody is having a breakthrough or somebody's working on something every single day that at least leaves me feeling like we're making some great strides.
Yep.
I want the listener to leave this podcast on just some hints or votes of optimism.
Yep.
So, John, what gives you optimism that we can start this whole public land management in the right direction?
Well, I mean, we've got a bill introduced by Senator Daines here just this spring, the America the Beautiful Act, 8 years, $100 million a year funding for National Wildlife Refuge infrastructure. I mean, that's a massive, massive deal. We got to make sure those dollars are well spent. So that's a priority conversation we're willing to have. Cyrus and I were a part of a conversation with the House Natural Resources Committee staff. We're hoping to help them get a bill drafted and dropped in the House. I think that's doable in this Congress. I think it's a bipartisan issue. There's strong support for it on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers. we've had some real wins at the state scale, and I'll let Cyrus talk to them, but White Lake's an important one. I think it's teaching us a blueprint to be effective there, I think, but I'll let Cyrus cover some more. There's been some real important wins, dedicated funding in Louisiana and Mississippi that represent opportunities, but I'll let Cyrus speak to some of the other things that may be a potential.
Yeah, when I think of reasons to be optimistic or things that I'm optimistic about on this topic, kind of going forward, is I think duck hunters, by and large, but certainly our members and volunteers are really leaning into being part of the solution. And I said it a little while ago that most state legislators, have kind of no grasp at all of these issues and how maybe a bill that they could write or a budget line item that they could add in could help. And we're really starting to talk about these things more and more in state capitals all across the country, and particularly the Southeast and places where they have will have big impacts. So I'm optimistic because I think our members see that they can be part of the change, and we romanticized it a little bit at the beginning, but maybe help change some of these state wildlife management areas and public lands back to their crown jewel that they used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I'm seeing a whole new wave of people being energized about the topic and about the issue. And so, I think we're going to build off of successes that we've had, like John talked about at White Lake, and being part of, a collaborative approach in places like Mississippi and Louisiana, and now in Wisconsin for, dedicated funding initiatives at the state level and stuff like that. So certainly a lot to be optimistic about. I know we maybe lean towards doom and gloom on some of these conversations here over the course of the hour, but I think there's a lot to be optimistic about.
So there's definitely power in numbers, and so you guys are are generating a stronger following. Your numbers have grown as well. Do you guys feel like this is a political environment where wins can be had?
I think so. I think the only way, though, you get to good public policy is decision makers know it's a problem, right? And when we were standing in front of our colleagues 2 years ago, and folks just were not aware of the state of the National Wildlife Refuge system, I think there's more partners showing real strong enthusiasm for this too, which helps, right? It's not just Delta. There's going to be a whole suite of people. I mean, Boone and Crockett, interestingly enough, is really interested in this issue, and TRCP and our colleagues at DU, and there's lots of people that have gotten really enthusiastic about this. And so I think there is an opportunity. I mean, Washington, D.C. doesn't always work particularly well, super partisan and ugly at times, but when you're talking about something like infrastructure for refuges and national parks, those are moments of great bipartisanship, and so I think these are the kinds of issues that I think bring out the best of politicians rather than the worst. And so I think absolutely, I think there's a moment here that we can capitalize on.
I do feel like a bit of an observer in this realm, but, over the course of our careers, they're like, hey, you guys, meaning some, large national nonprofits, non-government organizations, you guys should work together on a program. And I've always scratched my head a little bit because I think, it's such a big sandbox that if everybody, it's a bit of a divide and conquer type situation. But the one area that seems like every single time that it makes sense for large national nonprofits to work together is on policy. It's
absolutely
the closest thing to a selfless, mission-fulfilling act that I can think of.
Yep.
Where you pool resources, you pool your membership, you augment your voice. That's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, and there's been lots of evidence of that over the years, where lots of good people from across a spectrum of organizations and perspectives have come together and worked really hard. I mean, the Great American Outdoors Act was probably one of the greatest examples of that. And I mean, Cyrus worked with our colleagues at DU, and Nature Conservancy on dedicated funding in Mississippi, and with Wildlife Federation and DU and Louisiana. And so there's lots of examples where that approach has been super, super, super effective.
Yeah, and then there's, not to get too far into it, but even at the county level. Remember that one in Kansas, the Harvey County parks? It's not just in D.C.
Right. It's at the state and local community level as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great, guys. We covered this. It was a long discussion, but it's really tough to have this one, I think, in abbreviated format. So as a listener, if this got a little long on you, just pause it and pick it up on tomorrow's drive. We really appreciate everybody tuning in. Cyrus, thanks for joining us remotely.
Yeah.
Love to have you. Look forward to you coming back to the office at some point in time and getting the whole policy
I'll see you at
crew.
Expo. We'll see you.
See you at Expo. This will drop before the Expo, so last weekend of July. If anybody listening here is interested, we're our fourth Expo. Yep. This one will be in Oklahoma City, and love to have everybody there. We'll be podcasting from a stage right in the middle of the show floor this year. Hopefully that works out. Our
shameless plug for the policy department. We do a policy department meet and greet at the booth. I think it's on Saturday, John. Saturday morning.
I should know that.
It'll be in the program. How about that? It's billed on the program, and folks that are at Expo can come by and chat with us. We'll be there for a while. So.
Okay. Well, there's two people that I'd like to, I think we should say thank you to as well, is Kyle Winterstein, who's the podcast producer. He does a great job kind of setting us up for these conversations. And then Cole Gendrew, who's our cameraman and videographer. So can't do these things without him.
I'll say we can't.
We can't. No. Who has two thumbs and needs some help? This guy right here. So, all right, guys, thanks a lot. Like you said, Cyrus, we'll see you in Oklahoma City. John, appreciate it.
Yep, thanks a ton.
All right, take care.